50 years ago, on August 11th, 1965, the neighborhood of Watts in Los Angeles was the site of a police arrest of an African American man. In those days, such an occurrence was even more commonplace than it is today. But for a community that had had enough police persecution, something about that arrest sparked so much anger that a rebellion broke out. Referred to today as the Watts Riots or Watts Rebellion, depending upon one's political interpretation of the words, the 6 days that followed resulted in 34 deaths, more than 1,000 injuries, and tens of millions of dollars of damage. In the 1960s, racial segregation and oppression was not limited to the southern states, as our history books imply. Los Angeles, although a modern cosmopolitan city, still harbored many racial and economic divisions. The modern chapter of rebellion against police violence and poverty unfolded in Ferguson, Missouri a year ago, triggered by the police killing of 18-year-old Michael Brown. And on Sunday, Brown's father, Michael Brown Sr., led a march of activists through the streets of Ferguson to mark the moment his son was killed. And after the sunset, protests took a more militant turn. At one point, police opened fire on an African-American man that they say fired shots at them. Well, this year, as the Black Lives Matter movement has ignited a national uproar over the epidemic of police killings of African Americans, we examined the Watts Rebellion with my guest, Jody Armour, and also examine its links 50 years later, really 49 years later, to what unfolded in Ferguson last year. Jody Armour is the Roy P. Crocker Professor of Law at the University of Southern California. He's the author of many books, including Negrophobia and Reasonable Racism. Welcome to Uprising, Jody.
Good to be back with you, Sonali.
So last time we had you on, we were talking about the Department of Justice's report on Ferguson, and we'll get to Ferguson. Of course, it's highly symbolic that the 50th anniversary of Watts and the one-year anniversary of Ferguson are just separated by a couple of days. How do you explain for people who weren't even alive when the Watts Rebellion took place, what happened 50 years ago? Now, this was the same time that the Voting Rights Act was signed into law in D.C. There was white supremacist violence against African Americans in the South. But in California and Los Angeles, we expected, or these were supposed to be safe havens for a lot of African Americans who had migrated here, right?
Yeah, there were a lot of hopes and dreams and aspirations of African Americans coming from the South, and the second wave of the African American migration from the South toward the North and West, and in the 45, 46 year range. So you had segregation in the housing market, which led to areas like Compton and Watts being predominantly black. So we can't forget, kind of some of the redlining and housing discrimination that created the Watts in the first place. And then again, you had a police encounter with a citizen from the community being the trigger. Not the only cause, of course, of a rebellion being police interactions, but it being the most visible manifestation of the state's kind of oppression from this community standpoint. And this state representative or these state representatives showing a lot of disrespect to community members set them off.